because they'll see the way we can stand strongly in these turbulent times. And of course, these things will affect this country too. We have with us, as you know, members from Greece who are unable to practice in groups in their country. We don't know how lucky we are in that respect. But it would be ridiculous to imagine that this country will ride through the next 40 or 50 years without facing great problems socially, great difficulties. They're bound to. Because this is an era of change and everyone is desiring to find a better way of living, a better way of governing, there'll be this search for the true democracy which Sensei discussed in the guidance which Dr. Yamazaki gave you the other day. So we have to learn right now to stand on a rock and really to view things with the great light of Buddhism. When one understands the reason for things, then one never panics. Then we know through that how to get things straight, how to get people moving in the right way. This is why we are going to create this University of Life and Faith in NSUK, so that we get, as it were, used to looking at life in that way. Some people are a bit alarmed at the thought of a university. That's only a term. The whole of NSUK will be a university. I hope the whole of the membership of NSUK will take part in it. And we shall adapt it to the ordinary activities that we have. But we shall start looking at life and society, the problems of the world, the problems of humanity. In the UK Express and in our discussion meetings. Not all the time. We'd all be exhausted if we were tackling these big subjects every month. But about every third month, the UK Express will publish a very important article which has been researched by a team and well written. And then at the end of that month, we shall discuss it in our discussion meetings. So our discussion meetings have got to be really great. And in between now and when we start that system, we can really concentrate on getting our discussion meetings great. And as you know, there is a small committee under Kazuo Fuji sitting at this moment, meeting regularly, in order to help all of us to create fantastic discussion meetings. And then in those discussion meetings we will gradually introduce these important subjects which are of world concern for humanity. We'll see how we get on. Do you think it's a good idea? So everyone, please, when you go around, no one's got to be nervous about the University of Life. No one's got to think, oh, I haven't had the education to be in this university. Everyone can be there. The whole of NSUK should be a university of life and faith, which many people want to join in the future. Okay, let's have a break now for half an hour. We come back again at 11:20. All right? Because we're 5 minutes late. Thank you. We're obviously not going to be able to get through all this guidance in one morning, and we shall now jump a bit. The next part is called Buddhism in the Present Age, right, Paul? First, sorry.
Dependent origination of religion.
No, sorry. We're missing that out.
That's right. Yeah,
we're missing out Buddhism in the present age. The reason I'm doing this is, by all means read it later, if you haven't already. But here, Professor Kolm is giving a large number of points about how he feels Buddhism can be passed on in a way which appeals to the West. And as I explained earlier, he's a little bit behind the times on that one. So then Sensei goes on to talk about the book Les Miserables. Has anyone seen the show? Hands up who's seen the show. Oh, quite lots of you. It really sticks to the book pretty well, but of course large chunks are left out. It's an incredible production which does really give you a great idea of what the book is all about, which is not the case with all productions, is it? It really does. Who's read the book? Quite a few less. A few less. Anyway, it's a wonderful book. And speaking personally, I read it when I was very, very young, and I want to really read it again. I thought that after I saw the show. But in this, I really recommend you to read Sensei's description of the story of Les Miserables in the light of Buddhism. It's just amazing where he does it. I would love to have time to read it now, but time is short, and we better miss that out. But nevertheless, you should read it, because in a way it's a perfect example of the way in which you approach human affairs from the point of view of Buddhism, looking, in other words, to those depths of the inherent causes and effects rather than what is happening on the surface of life. So I really recommend you to read it. It's quite exciting and wonderfully done. So we'll move on now to, what page is it, Paul?
Bottom of page 20.
Bottom of page 20. Sounds a bit complicated: dependent origination and mutual interdependence. So Paul will start reading.
Next, President Ikeda discussed Dr. Kolm's views of the acceptance of Buddhism in the West. Kolm: up to now, Buddhism, while based on universal principles, has adapted itself to the cultures and special features of the many different peoples to whom it has been transmitted. If we look at history, for example, we see that a Chinese Buddhism developed in China and a distinctively Japanese Buddhism took shape in Japan. The most important thing for the West today is that as many people as possible be revitalized by the practice of Buddhism. To accomplish that, we must discover the propagation methods that will move and inspire Westerners. It is in that sense that a Western Buddhism, interpreted in a Western fashion, could be made to exist. I'm convinced that the time has arrived for the establishment of such a Western Buddhism. To achieve that, I would like to suggest the following 5 points of focus. 1. Religious practice. To strengthen faith and achieve the supreme understanding of the self, actual religious practice is an absolute necessity.
Let's take that one first. He's spot on, isn't he? He's spot on. A philosophy without a practice which enables you to live by that philosophy is actually nothing else but theory and totally useless. It's very difficult to actually live a philosophy unless the philosopher has provided a practice that enables one to do so. So in history, if we look back, there have been so many different philosophies, all of them in a way making some sort of partial sense out of life, but none of them carried with them a practice. So therefore it just was something that we read, we thought it sounded good, and it certainly opened our minds to more thinking about the world and about life in general, life and death and so on, but it wasn't of any actual help to us in the practice of our own daily lives. So really he's right there in that particular point. All right, point 2?
2. The concept of non-self. In the West, where the concept of self is highly developed, it is important to teach the doctrine of non-self to destroy the Western preoccupation with it.
So here, Sensei, a little later, after he's finished his 5 points, doesn't actually correct him on this one. The concept of non-self, which can be confusing, and which indeed has confused people interpreting the Buddha's teachings in the earlier times, from which Hinayana Buddhism arose. The non-self. People mistook that to mean that you got rid of yourself altogether, as it were. And people found that very difficult to do. So Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism didn't teach what was called the non-self. What Nichiren Daishonin taught was that we actually have a greater self, which is the Buddha state, or the Buddha nature, existing in every human life. In other words, we do not deny the existence of the lesser self, the smaller self, or ego. You can't deny it, because the ego is there as part of life. And of course it also has a function in life. So Nichiren Daishonin expanded that into the teaching of the greater self, or the Buddha state. In other words, we charge through, we break through the narrow, small boundaries of the lesser self into the greater self. The greater self, which is one with the universe and which enables us to embrace everyone and everything in it, including ourselves. Right? So Nam-myoho Renge Kyo is in fact the greater self of life, you could say, isn't it? I thought that was a fantastic cover we had in the UK Express the other day, painted by one of our members, maybe he's here, of the runner, the athlete, breaking through a brick wall with the bricks sort of scattering in all directions, breaking through from that narrow, small self, which is such a damn nuisance to us, isn't it, into the great self of the Buddha nature. This is a fantastic teaching, I think, and so meaningful. You can't deny the existence of the ego. As you know, in the teaching of the 9 consciousnesses, the ego is right there in the 7th consciousness. You can't do away with it. If you try to, that leads to suppression, which is dangerous, isn't it? Many religions have taught trying to separate the spirit from the body. Buddhism teaches you can't. They are 2 different things, but they're one. So you can't deny the existence of that narrow ego. But what you can do is to bust through it into something so much greater. And this is what the practice does for us. Step by step. We all know it in our human revolution. That's a fantastic teaching. Okay, point 3.
Point 3, changing the emphasis from the lessening of suffering to transforming suffering into pleasure. For Westerners who tend to minimize self-reflection and value direct action, it is more important to emphasize the ability to put our sufferings to a positive use rather than dwell on the passive attitude of lessening or reducing them.
Spot on. Right? We use sufferings to grow and become strong, great human beings. That is what enlightenment of the Buddhas taught. Okay?
4. Compassion. Christianity also teaches love of one's neighbour, which resembles Buddhist compassion. 5. Propagation of the teachings. The use of the power of the media cannot be ignored, but more important by far is personal contact on a one-to-one basis.
Then Sensei goes on.
These 5 points agree with our position, and I find them extremely rich in significance. Among them, compassion is described in Buddhism as relieving pain and providing pleasure. By that is meant ridding people of the sources of suffering and leading them to enjoyment, to a state of happiness. I would like to emphasize my belief that this is a more profound spiritual idea than love of one's neighbour. With regard to methods of spreading the Buddhist teachings, I can see that teaching and transmitting Buddhist ideas to a wide audience through the media may indeed be one method, but to really engage each person's heart and mind, I'm convinced that one-to-one dialogue is the only method. And in fact, the propagation efforts of our movement have been based on the method of personal one-to-one contact, which has resulted in the spread of the teachings across the globe.
So you can see, can't you, Sensei is gently putting him right. I think it's beautiful the way he does it. And particularly on this subject of love, this word love is so misused, isn't it? There are so many interpretations of the English word love. But by and large, it is, whatever those interpretations are, an emotion. This is the point. And emotions can constantly be changing, dependent on our circumstances. So love, therefore, in all its emotional meanings, is not something that is necessarily consistent and lasting. The Buddhist teaching of Jigay, mercy, or the Buddha's compassion, teaches that you must not only love, but you must also teach that person to be able to stand strongly in their own lives, right? And find happiness for themselves, of course, through the Buddhist practice. That is true compassion, which is something much deeper than that emotion of love, I believe. That is Jigay. So in other words, in some religions, perhaps Christianity particularly, for example, you are taught not to desire material things. You are taught, and indeed such is practiced by dedicated Christians, to go amongst the poor and do away with your own worldly possessions and live amongst the poor and help them. Of course, morally, that sounds very good. But the fact is, of course, that you go amongst the poor, you become poor yourselves, and you all remain poor together. The Bodhisattva too will go and live amongst the poor, but his determination is to both spiritually and even materially help the poor to become rich. Of course, I don't mean millionaires. Rich in spirit and rich generally in life. So there's a very, very, very different thing, isn't it? And you can see that that also has its bearing on the Christian word charity. Charity, of course, is giving sustenance in some form or another to another human being or another group of human beings. But it ends there, doesn't it? How that charity is used is an important matter. And we know that a great deal of charitable effort has been misused because of corrupt governments or whatever. But in Buddhism, charity, of course, you can give in the same way if you wish. But in giving to charity, you know through the Buddhist teachings that you're only giving temporary relief anyway. And indeed, if charity is overdone, the people who are receiving the charity feel shame and can actually turn against those who are giving them that charity. Whereas Jigay is the ultimate and perfect form of charity, because you give to somebody something which enables them to stand strongly themselves and change their unhappy karma, isn't it? Right? So important. Good. So we'll move on.
Next, the subject of the fundamental Buddhist teaching regarding the relationship between self and others was discussed. Kolm. Today in the West we have reached a point where we are being forced to consider other people and society at large. As a result, a contradiction has become manifest in the philosophy of the self that has held sway in the West up to now. Buddhism, which denies the concept of egoism, is pertinent in this respect. Also recently in the West, the concept of general interdependency has evolved, an idea of the mutual interrelation of the individual and society, which has something in common with the Buddhist concept of dependent origination. Ikeda. Our livelihoods, indeed our very lives, are entirely based on our relationships with others. In that web of relationships, each of us creates his own personal happiness. For this reason, it is impossible to divorce ourselves from others. As long as we accept the theory of dependent origination, which says that we exist based on our relations with various other people and things, it is impossible to cherish the self-centered notion that we can achieve our happiness apart from all other beings. Buddhism teaches that we must achieve the harmony of the individual and the whole and find happiness for both self and others together.
It's very clear, isn't it? No need to dwell really on that. This interdependency of all things. So the Buddhist view of the universe is of it consisting of a myriad of different living organisms, of which we are one as human beings, and each organism is supporting and protecting other organisms. Look at the universe as a whole. So in other words, even if this planet decayed, supposing there was a nuclear holocaust, which there won't be, because Nichiren Daishonin never said there would be, if there was, that planet would be like a cancer in the galaxy in which it exists. In other words, this planet is important in the balance of the galaxy as a whole. So that this planet should be a vibrant, creative, valuable object until its natural span of life is ended in billions and billions of years' time, and it explodes and goes back to the universe. It's very important that it remains a vibrantly functioning organism. So this is also the task of the great movement for Causton movement. So the West, as Mr. Kolm, Professor Kolm points out, has lost its understanding of its relationship with everyone and everything around it. I think we can think of all sorts of reasons for that. The breakup of the original rural population and the growth of great urban city populations lost that community caring which was so important. The feeling that people were responsible for the people who lived around them, and vice versa. And many other things. The welfare state even hasn't been very good for that either, because people felt that it was the state's job to look after everyone else and not themselves. However, it's good to see that there are efforts these days by groups of people here and there to revive the community spirit, don't you think? There's a beginning again of the feeling of need for it and the fact that we must do something about it. And that's where I think our chapter community projects, May festivals and so on, are so incredibly important. So this year was an incredible achievement on the part of the regional chapters. London, unfortunately, couldn't be spared from helping Taplow Court. Next time we do May festivals, I'm quite sure that London, because we shall be stronger, we shall have another 1,000 members or so by then, we shall be able then to enable the London chapters to do the same thing. It's fantastic. I mean, when you see all the various activity of the regional chapters, the immense variety of them, which they did in order to give happiness to their neighbors, this was just a wonderful thing, only a very small scale. But of course that can grow and grow and grow. And you're feeding to other people that concept, which is a very simple one, isn't it, of how one human being who desires to do so can spread so much happiness around them. So this is a really great thing. So I'm going to leave this next part, called Teachers and Parents, out because it concerns Dr. Kolm's own life. It's interesting, and you can read it if you wish. And we'll go on now to what is, in fact, from our point of view, the most important part of this conversation, because Sensei really now is beginning very solidly to teach Dr. Kolm about the fundamentals of the Buddhism we practice, Nichiren Daishonin's Buddhism. So we go down to the Lotus Sutra, king of all sutras.
On page 23. The discussion turned next to the Lotus Sutra and its view on life and the universe. Ikeda. France is the land where Eugene Burnouf, the first translator of the Lotus Sutra into a Western language, was born. In that respect, France has been a pioneer in introducing Buddhism to the West. Kolm. I don't know whether Burnouf translated the Lotus Sutra in its entirety, but it was certainly an important achievement. I and many others studied the sutra in his translation. Ikeda. Among all the Buddhist scriptures, traditionally described as the treasury of 80,000 teachings, the Lotus Sutra has come to be regarded as the supreme teaching. The core of the Lotus Sutra is Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, which is indicated in the lifespan of the Tathagata, 16th chapter. Nam Myoho Renge Kyo is the totality of all life and the fundamental law that runs through the entire universe.
Tathagata is a phrase that you meet in the Gosho from time to time. So it's interesting to know the meaning of that. It means, sounds strange, but it means either thus come one or thus gone one. Can you believe it? Thus come one and thus gone one. One, that is meaning the Buddha, who has arrived from the world of enlightenment into this world. In other words, the Buddha is eternally enlightened, and he's come from somewhere into this world, and he will go on from this world to another world in the state of enlightenment. Do you see what it means? So it means the Buddha's enlightenment is eternal. But the Buddha also, of course, means you and me and every human being, if they're fortunate enough to be able to tap that Buddhahood. Our Buddhahood is eternal. It's always existed in all our lifetimes, both in the past and will exist always in our lifetimes in the future. Of course, there may be times where, due to our slander or whatever, we weren't able to realize that Buddhahood. But it's always been there. at the heart of every human being. So that's what thus come one and thus gone one means. Specifically, of course, the Buddha Shakyamuni, and in case of Nichiren Daishonin's teachings, the original Buddha Nichiren Daishonin. So both interpretations are correct, and they mean that arrival into this world and on to another world. All of us will do it. We are taught, aren't we? And we feel in our lives too, that if we make the right causes of activating our Buddha state in this life by chanting Nam-myoho Renge-kyo, then we will also be able to do so in our next lives. So that process can go on and on far into the eternal future. Right? Do you believe it? Fantastic. Good. Okay, on you go.
There are 28 chapters in the Lotus Sutra. The first, the introduction, begins with the words, "Thus I have heard." And the last chapter, the encouragement of Bodhisattva Fugen, ends with the words, "They paid their respects and departed." The sutra begins with the word "thus" and ends with "depart." "Thus" refers to birth, and "depart" refers to death. That is, the two facts of life and death. The Lotus Sutra teaches the true nature of life as it passes through birth and death over and over again.
Thank you. So you may remember how Nichiren Daishonin, the Gosho, describes what is known as the first council. The first council was held 100 years after the Buddha's death, and it was designed to record the teachings of Shakyamuni. And as each disciple wept at the thought of the joy of their understanding of the Buddhist teachings, they started off by saying, "Thus I have heard. Thus I have heard." So this meaning of this, "thus I have heard," means I not only heard with my ears, but I heard with my whole life. And I have done everything that I possibly can to put those teachings into action, to live those teachings. That is the meaning of "thus I have heard." So when we read that somewhere in the course of our study of Buddhism, please understand this is the meaning, and indeed refresh that feeling in your life. You have heard the teaching of Nam-myoho Renge-kyo and of how you should practice to the gonzen. And not only did you hear it, but you also desired with your whole life to put it into action in your lives. Thus I have heard. The incredible, solemn statement, which sounds simple, but in fact is immensely meaningful, isn't it? So this is a point to remember. All right? Thank you. Thank you.
The lifespan of the Tathagata chapter mentioned earlier is the core of the Lotus Sutra, and the core of that chapter is the verse known as the Jigay, which begins, "Since I attained Buddhahood," and ends with, "and quickly attained the Buddha's state."
Right? Jigay Tokuburai. And then how does it end? Right. Sokujo Jubushin. Right. On you go.
It starts with the word "since" and ends with "state." These Chinese ideograms can also be combined to mean self, and the Jigay teaches the true nature of the Buddha's existence. That in turn is the illumination of the nature of existence of all living things.
So just pausing there, this is important, isn't it? Considering the fact that we recite the Jigay 5 times every morning and 3 times every evening, that's 8 times a day. It's no bad thing to have some feeling about what it is that we're saying as we begin to chant Jigay Tokuburai. But this is Sensei is explaining here. In other words, this was Shakyamuni Buddha's experience of life, both within himself and around him in the universe, that he was explaining in this section called the Jigay. But what he is not saying is how we can get the same experience. In other words, his experience was the enlightenment of the Buddha state, which enabled him to understand all things. But he never actually stated how he achieved that situation in his life. So, of course, there were reasons for this. And generally speaking, in a nutshell, this was because it wasn't the time. It wasn't the time in the development and history of this planet for human beings to have the intellectual capacity to understand what the Buddha understood. So he could give his experience of it. Like a discussion meeting, you give your experience. But the people sitting around him couldn't really grasp it themselves. I think one can understand that when you realize that the Buddha, Shakyamuni, was a charismatic person, an incredible personality to the simple people who he lived amongst. Not only, of course, was he a Buddha, the enlightened one, which is what the Buddha means, but also he was a prince, part of the ruling family of that part of the world. He was like a film star. So no peasant, no simple farmer or person of that nature could possibly imagine in those times, which were quite primitive still, that they could ever be like Shakyamuni. Whereas Nichiren Daishonin, 2,000 years later, was saying to people, you can actually attain exactly the same life state as me. In other words, 2,000 years later, people were beginning to become conceited enough to believe it. So that is, yet Shakyamuni's experience was very important because he provided the teachings which would in due course validate what Nichiren Daishonin taught. In other words, Nichiren Daishonin was teaching the ultimate reality or the ultimate truth of life, which was Nam-myoho Renge-kyo. But he could prove that not only through actual proof, which of course he said was the most important thing in people's own lives, but he could prove it in an intellectual or literary sense through relating back to the flow of Buddhism from Shakyamuni's teachings all the way down through 2,000 years to his own. Shakyamuni, Tiantai, Dengyo, and all these great sages who gradually developed and systematized what Shakyamuni had taught up to the time of Nichiren Daishonin's appearance to follow. So some people get it quite wrong. They think that in some way Nichiren Daishonin must have been putting down Shakyamuni. On the contrary, Nichiren Daishonin constantly praises Shakyamuni. Indeed, he took a statue, a little carved wooden statue of Shakyamuni Buddha to the grave with him. Because Shakyamuni played a vital role in preparing the way for the ultimate truth to be propounded when the time was right. You understand? So, in the Jigay, coming back to that, Shakyamuni is giving his experience. That is all that contains. But today, we recite that. In reciting the Juryo chapter and the Jigay, we are praising what Shakyamuni Buddha did, but then we chant Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, which is the ultimate truth which was taught by the self-enlightened Nichiren Daishonin. Shakyamuni in the Lotus Sutra makes it clear that he in the past was also taught. I too carried out the Bodhisattva austerities, he said. He was also taught by a great sage or a great Buddha. Nichiren Daishonin was self-enlightened. Nobody taught him. Indeed, his master, Dozenbo, the temple he was brought up in, never ever agreed totally with what Nichiren Daishonin was teaching. Never ever could bring himself to practice. He was so fearful that he'd get into trouble with the authorities. But Nichiren Daishonin, self-enlightened, and having realized his enlightenment, he then went off for 13 years in order to study all the Buddhist teachings that he could lay his hands on in Japan, so that when he was challenged in debate, he could validate what he was saying in the direct line from the teachings of the Lotus Sutra down to today. Do you follow? So this is an amazing thing, really. And the Jigay, which we recite, was that teaching, theoretical teaching, or an experience, like we give our experience at a discussion meeting. It's theory, isn't it, for the people who hear it until they try it themselves. But Shakyamuni could not then say how to do it. And this was the purpose of Nichiren Daishonin's birth and mission and purpose in life, to be the first one on this planet who declared Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. So Nichiren Daishonin said himself that he only appears once. Now he's somewhere else, being the first one in some other planet, in all the potential Buddha's lands in the universe. So then Sensei goes on to explain about Nam-myoho Renge Kyo. All right, Paul?
As you no doubt see, the Lotus Sutra teaches the true nature of existence itself. Our life is a microcosm of the universe. Our heads are round like the dome of the heavens. Our eyes are like the sun and moon. Opening and closing our eyes are like night and day. The gleam of our hair is like the sparkling of the stars, and our eyebrows are like the Big Dipper. Our breathing is like the wind, and the soft exhalations through our nostrils are like the gentle breezes that waft through the valleys. We are said to have 360 joints in our body. This represents the year. The major joints are the 12 months. Our warm stomachs are spring and summer, and our cold, hard backs are autumn and winter. Our blood vessels are the streams and rivers. Our bones are stones. Our skin and flesh are like the earth, and our body hair is like its forests. Our internal organs, too, are all parts of a microcosm of the universe. This correspondence is explained in detail in the Buddhist scriptures. Our head is myo, mystic. Our throat is ho, law. Our breast is ren, lotus. Our stomach is ge, flower. And our feet are kyo, scripture. Our very being is nothing other than Nam-myoho Renge Kyo.
It's very inspiring, isn't it? So in other words, Sensei, in repeating these teachings, which are in several Gosho, he's saying, you are Nam-myoho Renge Kyo, Professor Kolm, from head to foot. And so am I, and so is every other human being, if they could only but know it. And of course Professor Kolm there really wants to spread these teachings. He wants other human beings to know it. That's what he's saying all the way through this.